Okay, great to be back with you again. Here we are once more. And today's topic is, my subtitle is God's ways are above man's ways. So again, just because I like to start with something, I thought I would start with the Bible verse from Isaiah, which I'm sure you know well. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And I think the thing that struck me, and again, it's one of those things we talk about often. It's lovely, the older you get, the more experience you have of God, and the more experiences you've had of God, situations you've been with God, people you've been involved with and seeing God in their life. But there's also the danger with that is that you gain experience and you gain, and so there can be that, like, the older you get, often said that to our kids, I'm not clever or wiser than you, I've just lived longer. And so I've just got more life experience. But there's also the truth of that with God. And so there's a lovely thing of what, because you can look back, if you go look back over your life, all that you've experienced with God and the situation. So, I actually always remember that quote from you. Well, I mean, you actually said it at the time, and it's in your book about the Russian trip, when you'd seen God provide miraculously, when you're in Ottawa and seen him provide miraculously at the last minute for your airfares, and you said, I'll never doubt God again until the next time. But the next time you do have, well, I know what it is. I know what it is to see God. I mean, you do have the benefit of that. On the other hand, the downside of that is that you can tend to rely on your experience and, this is the way it's done. I saw God do it this way. And so, again, there's so many examples, but I thought it's actually one of those things which is true and remains, if you live in love with God, remains fresh. That actually God's ways aren't our ways, and so you want to almost know every time you have experienced God's ways, and you do want to kind of almost know them, remember them. Because it's amazing, like any, God coming down, Jesus coming down, them drawing us up. When any of those interchanges between us and God are amazing, but then there's the danger of making them, almost kind of trying to, in this picture, my ways are above your ways, almost trying to pull them down and anchor them here somehow, as if I know God's ways now. And I think I've got to make sure that I keep knowing God and don't know His ways, because in reality, I think often what God says does. I mean, often say the best example that we often have is Jesus. What Jesus did or said, if you went on what had happened previously, is not what you would expect him to do or say. Again, and he's not trying to do the opposite of what you expect, but he is just being true to God his Father, the nature of God. And so it's almost one of those things that for us just to remember, don't think, even as yourself, as your understanding of God grows, as your knowledge of God grows, you can almost say, okay, I'm getting, which is what I'm getting an understanding now. I don't know it all, but don't forget that God's view on everything, whether it's big things like time, is completely different to ours. And so it emphasizes to me the importance of staying in that love relationship with God constantly. And then again, one of the things I love when talking with you is, you have lots of experiences of God that you could talk about. And it's not that you don't talk about them, but they're not it's not, oh, I experienced this with God. It's who God currently is, and your desire to stay, current, what is on God's heart for you now? What is God saying to you now? Not, oh, I know what God said in a situation which was similar to this before. That's what we should rely on. And yet that's a real, again, I just think it's a danger or a trap or something to be aware of for anyone. I mean, any Christian, whether I've known God for a week, I've known God for 50 years. I mean, whatever. I definitely know God more today than I did 10 years ago, than I did a year ago, than I did last week. That's true. But it's not, that's to keep drawing me to God, not to have a kind of a pool of resources that are separate to God, that I can think, again, things that have happened with God I've experienced, but that take me away from actually God, and not forgetting that I don't understand God's ways. I just think I do, and I just understand them better than I always have. So I think.
Yeah. Well, that's something too, because even when you think like, because in the Bible we do read about, you know, walking in God's ways, like even that very picture means like it's a step-by-step life. Like God reveals his ways as we walk in them. And when we look back over our shoulders down the road we've come, like for me now, if I look back to when I was 17 and I'm now 83, I think, well, that's a long time I've walked with Jesus. And I can look back and say, yeah, there was that and that. You know, I could look down this long road and I see the way he's led me and how faithful he's been and the amazing things that he's done and how much he's more than done or more than been to me what I could have imagined he would have been. He was that because he's God. And then I look forward and I'm still here and I'm still walking with him. But I still don't know the next step and the next step unless I walk with him, or I don't have confidence to take those steps. And how foolish I would be. The one thing I have definitely learned is the foolishness of thinking that I know where to go next. I don't. Because God, being the creator, being constantly creative, and it's like the way that people talk about God, and this is the problem with making a study of God. Put God in a textbook and say, this is how God does this is why God... Like, are we talking about someone who's still alive and still around? Or are we talking about someone who lived in the past whose life we can analyse and define things about him and understand what made him tick? This is the living God who is the one who keeps the whole universe moving, operating. If he pulled the plug on the universe, there would be chaos. So he's the one that I'm living and walking with. He's the one who, though he's the Lord of the universe, he gives all of himself to me, as only God could and only God would, out of his love. So not only don't I need anyone but him, but what a horrible thought to think that I could say, okay, well, I've got it all figured out. I know how God works. I know what God likes, what he doesn't like. So I've learned all that stuff. Whether God's around or not, I know what to do. And that, like, rips relationship, the intimacy that is the heart of everything that exists between each person and God who knows God, and every person who knows God, rips it right out and says, okay, now being a Christian now is just a matter of knowing enough stuff, getting it all under your belt or in your head, and just go along with that. And there's no that is a sterile thing. There's no life in that. And so, but then, walking in God's ways means intimacy, like constant intimacy. It means that I am going back to our previous when we're talking about that single focus on God. I can't afford to step away from him. I can't afford to take my eyes off him. I can't afford to not depend on him. Not because I'm afraid to, although in a sense, yes, I am afraid to, but because I don't want to, not because I don't want to get things wrong. I naturally don't want to get things wrong, but from my heart, I don't want any distance between me and him. I don't want anything to be displeasing because I love him. And that love for him and that love relationship with him can't be manufactured. It's got to come because of where you are in your responses to God, where you have chosen to be. And then when you're living like that, then you want to know his ways. Like we are incredibly privileged. When you think of when we're in eternity with him, everything will be as it should be, as it was meant to be, as it was in the beginning with Adam and Eve in the garden. But in this world, it's not like that. Like Jesus said, in this world, you'll have tribulation. But he also said, be of good cheer. It's okay. I've overcome the world. What he's saying is, stick with me. Stick with me. Because in this world, we have the privilege of discovering God and living with God, not in the ideal, in anything but the ideal. So actually, this world is the antithesis of the ideal environment. Jesus came to say, yeah, but look how you can live in this world as I did. And so he's with us. He said to his disciples, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. He sent his Spirit on the day of Pentecost so that we could live and walk with him in this world. And I love that, because the danger, again, for often for Christians, for God's people, for believers, is that we can see this world as an alien threat that somehow we've got to cope with or contend with or protect ourselves from, protect our children from. It is saying, like, Jesus said it, we are the light of the world. Mm-hmm. We are the salt of the earth. And we have the privilege of expressing him in this world. The most beautiful thing that we know, not the most beautiful thing, one of the beautiful things that we know is that light always overcomes darkness. And light overcomes darkness not by a tad of effort, but just by being light. Mm-hmm. And darkness, by its very nature, cannot exist in the presence of light. So for us to be with God, to walk in his ways, is not meant to be a great effort or a great slog or a tedious thing, but it must be total. If it's not total, if we compromise by looking at alternatives like how much can I learn, how much can I take on board, how much can I be on top of things so I've got God figured out and what God's will is and what God wants to do, then I choose those things against relationship with God and that intimacy with him.
Which is, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because on one hand you think, like, there's so much that we don't know, and yet at the same time God wants you to know. I mean, God's not trying to be elusive, he's not trying to be unknowable. He's knowable, just that there's so much to him and of him. And I think that's I love seeing that in your life, like, because like, you could think, okay, well, I am 83 years old now. I've kind of like now's like, I'm on the downhill bit of my life, or I've plateaued, but there's more and you want more because there is more, and that's not like there's more. It's kind of like, wow, there's more. And again, and on one hand, it's going to continue for eternity. But actually, it's lovely even on this life is that to actually want that. Like, it's not like, oh yeah, I've kind of now after, whatever it is, 70 years, 50 something years of living with God, I know, I basically know what it is to live for God. That, I mean, like, you've said to me, you actually feel like that. If only you knew what you know now, you knew before, so you could live it. And so, which is actually a lovely thing. But it's actually even like to want that, like, I don't know your ways, but I want to keep knowing your ways. I know that you want me to know your ways, and you keep drawing me in that. And like I say, there's, based on those truths, that there's light, but there's always more. There's more to know, but don't start trying to confine it to what I know and what I understand. Like, say, in what you're saying about, I can feel like, this is a foreign environment. That's how it feels like, but that's not the truth. I mean, it might feel like that to you, but that's not the truth. When you're living that way, you're not living in what I've said to you. You're not living in the way that Jesus said. And, because, I can feel that, say, in a worship time, I can feel that in a prayer time, I can feel that when I'm, spending time with God, but then I can be in here and then you almost forget that. But now it feels like this is a foreign environment and I've got to work. And so it's again that of living in that reality of, okay, God, your ways are above my ways. So I can feel that and tune into that at times, but in different circumstances, my feelings, the alarm bells start going off, threat, worry, concern, not sure what to do. Because I mean, even there's just that reality, like, the unknown just naturally scares me. I don't like the unknown. Yeah. I love it that God's ways are above ours and they're big. I love that. But then in a situation, I kind of like, just give me some parameters. Give me, like, say, like, for you to say, actually, I'm not sure what the next step's going to be and telling you to take it. On one hand, sounds wonderfully freeing. On the other hand, at your age, can be like, surely after all this time, I should have a general, an idea about what's happening and what's next. And in a sense, you do. It's with God. It's more with God. It's making sure you're right beside God. But what the expression of that is, you really don't know and don't want to know. But again, I love that, because again, to me, that's one of those things where maybe when you're young, that kind of matches your age and your natural approach to life. But as you get older, it doesn't. Your natural approach to life gets more, cautious, conservative, aware. Even based on the past, you've got to watch out for these things. And so, but I actually love seeing you not making yourself, but actually, it's true. That's it's still, well, not only is it still the desire of your heart, it's probably, it's that desire of your heart has grown over all that time. So it's, it's not that it wasn't the desire of your heart before, but that desire has grown, and it's more true of you, and probably as because it is more in contrast with your age, it shows out more. But to me, I love that, and I love that. Again, you're always wanting to know more of God and what is God saying to you today, rather than wanting to be the just naturally wiser, older statesman, elder, founder who's kind of got lots of experience to draw on. That what you want to know is what is God saying to you about a situation at any point in time. But again, because that actually is what matters to you, because that actually is the desire of your heart.
There was a time many years ago that I thought that by the time I got to my age, if I was still alive, I'd have all this wisdom and knowledge and experience, to dispense. But it's been beautiful for me. It is beautiful to me to realise how my dependence on God is what I've learned more of over the years, and it's the joy of that. Because another aspect of getting older is that it's a common thing with us older people that we look back so longly in the past. We live in the past a lot. That's the natural thing, is to live in the past, because the past is a known quantity. There's nothing frightening and stuff, or nothing frightening, nothing unknown, because you've been there, you've done that. And so it's there's something very pervasive about that. And God has never let me do that, because God always kind of almost faces me forward. If I'm tempted to look over my shoulder and say, like, but what about what's ahead? That's a beautiful thing, because walking with God, never, as you're saying, really, it never ends in, really, because when I take the last step in this life, the next step will be in eternity with God. Like, it's beautiful. But the lovely thing about it too is that there is always somewhere to go. And I love talking about God's principles rather than patterns, because again, it's human nature to want to create patterns, to look at it, even whether it's their behaviour patterns or whatever. And so we'd like to be able to being a Christian for long enough, you start to find out, God's patterns of behaviour, what God does in this situation, that situation, all the time, so we can have it all sussed out more, and we can get the security of knowledge, which, in that perverse way for human nature, it kind of, to the extent that I've got that, I'm not so dependent on God. I don't have to exercise faith. I don't have to live in trust. Nothing unexpected round the corner, and that's it's as one of the scriptures I like from the Old Testament that talks about God, Moses and Israel and God, and it says that God made known his ways to Moses and his acts to the children of Israel. And at the time when the Israelites were travelling across the wilderness, and Moses erected the tent of meeting, where he would go and meet with God, and whenever God saw Moses heading for the tent, then God, who was always there as the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, as soon as he saw Moses heading for the tent, God was there, and then the pillar would be outside the tent while God and Moses, and it says, talked face to face. God talked face to face with Moses as a man talks with his friend. And as we know, the first time that happened, Moses didn't realise when he came out of the tent. I mean, it wasn't just like bright-eyed and kind of alive. His face was so bright that the Israelites couldn't stand. It was like looking at the sun. And so from then on, he got the idea that he'd have to come out with a veil over his face so the people wouldn't all have to turn their backs. But the other thing about this is that it also tells us in that account that when Moses would go to the tent and God would come and talk with Moses, the Israelites each one would stand at their tent door and worship. And to me, there's such a stark difference. Like Moses went in to God's presence to be with God, and that's where God could make his ways known to Moses. In other words, God drew Moses into his life, and it wasn't so much like God wasn't giving him lectures. Right, these are the ways. So come and be intimate with me, and I show you. And God was real to Moses, so God's ways were real. For the Israelites, all they saw were God's acts. They saw what God did. They never learned his ways, because to know God's ways, you have to live in face-to-face intimacy with him. And anyone, even someone like Moses, in Israel, he was a standout. But it wasn't meant, there was one other person, as we know, Joshua, a young man, he was a young man then, Joshua, who was sort of Moses' right-hand man. I don't know what he was, but he was always like there with Moses. And he would go into the tent with Moses. And when Moses, sort of had to get on and get out there and start running all the affairs of the Israelites nation, Joshua didn't have those responsibilities. So Moses would leave and Joshua would stick around in there. And I've often felt and wondered and said that if one man could, that tent, I don't know how big that tent was, but it could have been as big as necessary to accommodate as many of the Israelites who were willing to be a part of that whole gathering. God didn't want Moses to be separate in that way. Moses didn't want to be separate that way. But the Israelites had the security, like, I'll worship God from here, from my tent. I feel safe here. It's wonderful that we've got a God like that. It's wonderful we've got a God like Moses that meets with God, and then he comes out. We can't stand to look at him, at his face. He has to put a veil over his face, but we know that he talks to God, and therefore God is still in control of things, and Moses will do what he's called to do. Whereas the heart of God would be, come, you're my people, come and dwell with me. When he sent Jesus, as we know, Jesus came for that purpose. When Jesus died and the veil in the temple was torn from top to bottom, because that veil in the tabernacle and the temple was the separation between God and man. He says, come on, it's all for you to live in with me. Come and live where I live. And that is you don't learn God's ways by learning as we think of learning. You learn God's ways by living in that relationship with him. And then whatever you need to know, you know. But God's ways, then are built into us by him. They're put into our hearts. It's not that we've got a book that tells us God's ways, or we've accumulated the information.
Yeah, which is, it's actually a great picture, isn't it? Moses in the tent of meeting. It's like, Moses heads towards it, God heads towards it. I don't know whether Joshua sneaks in, but Joshua's in there. It doesn't say he was invited, but he was allowed. Joshua stays in. But you realise again, because it's always like those examples. Mary, Martha, Lazarus. I always pick. I want to be Mary. But probably in that picture, I want to be Moses. But I'm actually much more likely to be one of the children of Israel, standing close, but at my tent. Worshipping, but from a little bit of a distance. And again, it reminds me. It's again because I read them when I was a kid. Listen to them as an adult with our kids. Then the Narnia series where Aslan, the Jesus figure, it's always like, I'm not a tame lion. You can come and be with me, but I am not guaranteeing anything. And so that it's just that it always is, the unpredictability of a wild animal is, who knows exactly what they're going to do. So and so it's a great picture, because there's something so God, Jesus, who they are, the idea that being that close, knowing God's ways, but that therefore he can do anything, say anything, expect anything, point out anything, all that I love it, and it scares me at the same time if at all I'm worried about myself. And so it has to be that it's just, because it's really appealing when it's all just about God. It's all just for God. So you realize those things that you're saying in the previous episode about Jesus' single focus, that's important, because then there's nothing threatening about it at all, because the only thing it possibly threatens is that God's going to ask me to do something I don't want to do. He's not going to ask me to do something that I can't do, because enables me to do it. But he might ask me to do something that I don't want to do, or I don't want to do right now, or I don't want to do in the manner in which he's asking me to do it. and so you think, that's why you end up, one layer back, maybe the first row of tents, then you end up another layer back. So you realize, well, we can look at that example and think, well, how ridiculous. Why, who would be in the tent of meeting? And yet how easy it is to do that, because because of the enormity of God, because of the vastness, the depth of God, but also because of the unpredictability of God, because of God seeing the whole big picture. In the whole big picture, God really loves me. On the other hand, I am only one person. And so what might be best for the whole of God's glory, what that might mean for me. And so I both love that, and it can kind of scare you at the same time. But that's why it's actually just living in that reality. But at the same time, go with your heart, isn't it? Like say, actually, that's what, again, you think with Joshua, it's where his heart longed to be. So he didn't seem to wait for invitation. He just kind of knew that's where I want to be. And whatever it means, that's what I want to experience. And I think, well, that's actually that actually is all of our heart's desire. And they say, God saying, come, Jesus has made the way. Like there's nothing stopping you except you actually wanting it and desiring it. And actually saying, I don't know what it is. I was using this example talking to the guys recently, just, there's a door and I know God's the other side of the door, but I don't know what's behind there yet. I think, well, I'll find out. So walk through the door, but it's almost like I'd like to know what's in that. But I'd like to have an idea about what's in there. I think I just that's where God is. That's actually all I need to know. Like Moses didn't need to know what God was going to say. No. He wanted to be with God, and so whatever God was going to say, whatever God was going to, whether it was to move, to stay, to do, he just wanted to do that. Yeah, and I think it's actually when you read that does stir my heart. Yeah. But again, you have to seek it, ask for it. You have, again, God would go whenever time Moses went, but you have to, there's still there's that action for you to do as part of it, which is wonderful. So.
Yeah, and it is lovely when you think about that, how that God actually let Moses choose when they get together. He could have said, Moses, don't call me, I'll call you, I'll let you know. Yeah. But God, so desiring that relationship, and as we know, Moses was a very busy man because so much of the responsibility for not just leading Israel, for dealing with day-to-day affairs was on his shoulders. And yet, as soon as he headed for that tent, for God, that was all the cue he wanted. Mm-hmm. And I think that again, it's part of the whole thing of how much for me, God's spent most of my life just getting through to me how much it means to him to be with me. It's a no-brainer how much it means or should mean for me to be with him. But that's the bit that I think for most of us it's I can't be quite like that, it's great that he even, if a sovereign or some important person that you know about sent you an invitation to just get together with them once, and go, wow, imagine that, they want to talk with me. But this is the God of the universe again. It's so almost at odds with the whole concept of Almighty God, that a person like me, like any one of us, could matter so much. Jesus died for us too, which is wonderful. But that in day-by-day things, moment-by-moment things, when God knows that it matters to me to be with him, to have some time with him, or to open my heart to him about something, he's there. Right. And so he never has to be persuaded, never has to be talked into it, because that's how much he loves us. That's not, that doesn't say something wonderful about God. It actually says something wonderful. Yes, it does say it about God, but the wonder is that he's made us mean so much to him by his choice, that he does not want to miss any opportunity for us to draw closer to him.
Which is, and you just have to, again, it's one of those, I don't understand that, and I don't need to understand it. But I know it, and I just have to believe that again, I don't understand why or how each one of us is that important to God? That living in a love relationship with me, with you, would even matter to God, and He'd love it, but He does, and I know that, and so it's living on that basis. So, which is a wonderful place to stop for now.
It is, just for now.
Just for now, and we'll see you again next time.